Help me welcome prize winner at Sundance, a prize winner at the Cannes Film Festival. Ladies and gentlemen, your friend Ryan Coogler.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for coming out to see the film. It means so much, not just to me, but to the community that was involved with making it, and to all the artists that were involved in putting it together. It was a miracle for us just to get it completed. It really means a lot for you guys to take time out of your days and show up. It really does.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because since the movie has played Sundance, you've been to a number of cities with this place. Tell me about the first time when you showed in Oakland, what that response was like.
Oh,
Oh my God. Good looking out, brother. Thank you. When you showed in Oakland, the response up there in the theater.
Yeah, we it was interesting because it was a film that we made with a whole lot of cooperation and involvement of the Bay Area community. But when we showed the film publicly for the first time, we showed it in Utah, and then and we were required for distribution. And then we showed the film again, and actually outside of the country in France. And then we showed the film in Los Angeles when we came back at the LA Film Festival. And then finally we were able to show it, back home in the Bay Area. And,
were you nervous by that? I mean, because this is a big bill. The prize at Cannes, the prize at Sundance, the press attention it got. Would that make you a little anxious about showing it there finally?
Well, yeah, I was really nervous. I'm nervous every day. I'm nervous just standing here with you right now. But yeah, I was definitely nervous, man, and anxious, and people in the Bay were, a lot of people helped make it, and we're really excited to see it, and we're I didn't want to let them down, so those feelings were there. But I was also excited for people to see their work on the screen, and for people to have the experience of seeing, what the finished product was,
But just being seeing it there in that place, in that community, because again, by this point, there's a lot of attention that's come to the movie. You've had a chance to show it literally in places all over the world. Coming back, I said literally, of course, it would be figuratively, but anyway, coming back to that place, because I remember when I met you, when you introduced yourself to me at Sundance, Oscar Grant, part of his family was there. I mean, they came out for that, and just that feeling in that room, that must have been, we put a lot of pressure on you to show it in Oakland, did it not?
Absolutely, and those feelings were there. We showed it in Oakland probably tenfold to what they were, at Sundance, because everybody was very familiar with it. Everyone in the audience pretty much had some sort of personal stake in it, whether they knew Oscar, whether they knew the filmmakers involved, whether they were there when the events happened. So I mean, it was definitely that energy there, but it was also incredibly positive energy. And for me, I really love my home. I love where I'm from, and the film was very much about that love and about why I love the Bay Area and why I feel like it's a special place, and I hope to capture that, and I felt some of that energy coming back off of the audience, after we had the screening that night.
I know that Michael said, and we just did this event at the LA Film Festival a little more than 3 weeks ago now. He said you were his touchstone. Whenever he felt like he was kind of, you need to hear the voice, need to hear what that Oakland accent sounded like, he went to you, and you would just kind of like, you talk a little bit, and that would always pull him back in. How conscious were you of that being that kind of touchstone for him?
I mean, being a director, you have a lot of jobs. One of the most important jobs is to be there and to be supportive of the actors. They have, actors are kind of the vehicle that the audience, rise the story of the film through. And when an actor's on set, they don't really have anybody there that's watching them except for the director. I take that part of my job extremely serious, and I always want to be there for them. Mike is an incredible actor, and he's from Newark, New Jersey. I don't know if a lot of people know that. People would think he was from like Baltimore, or he was from Texas, because he played in these great television shows. He's actually from Newark, and if Mike, walked in here right now being himself, he'll come in like very, very East Coast. Everything is yo and son, and even down to posture, man. It's funny because I don't know if you guys know about how many of you guys are familiar with like Bay Area people or spend time. Okay, cool. So the funny part about the Bay is when things get, like, if you're in the streets and things get tense, stuff's about to go down, we get very quiet. You know what I mean? Like, we don't really talk much at all. On the East Coast, when they get pissed, they get super loud. You know what I mean? Like, everything's like, yo, son, you know what I mean? What's going on, son? You know, so it was a few things like that I'll always be conscious of. And it was a dialect thing, you know, like the way East Coasters would talk. Some things Mike would say, and they'd just kind of stick out like a sore thumb to my ear when we were in the Bay Area. So we came up with a code word, which was water.
Or water, as we say here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, water.
Let's hear the Oakland spin on that.
I mean, it's close. Water. It's close though. Like, but for Mike, for the East Coast, it's water. You know, so whenever he be talking, I hear that East Coast thing slipping back out. I'll just say water, and then he'll know to click back into it. And there was a few direct substitutions. Like instead of son, you know, we say bruh, where I'm from. So we would just flop that out. And it was a posture thing too. East Coast, they play a lot of basketball on the East Coast, and they walk around a lot. Like in the Bay, we play football and we drive. So you know, our posture is a little more hunched over. You know, but on the East Coast, Mike is always like this. You know, so you know, when we were young in the Bay, we can't walk around like this because it's like you're poking your chest out. Somebody want to take a shot. So you know, things like that.
Well, that's the thing about the movie, though, is that it feels real from the very start. I've told you this before, after I first saw the movie. What I think is most interesting about this movie is something you don't see in a lot of first-time filmmakers, is the way you use time in the movie. I mean, each moment kind of counts, and each scene feels like it takes place in real time. You don't telescope anything. You don't flash forward. When did you decide to make the movie in that way? Tell the audience about that.
You mean in terms of making the film a pretty much 24-hour film?
Not really like jumping ahead, you know, not flash.
Right.
You don't do a lot of cutting in scenes.
Right.
There are a lot of long takes in the movie.
Yeah, a lot of long takes. I mean, the decision to tell the film in that style, it really came from a lot of films that I admired. You know, especially around the time that I was in film school, and I kind of noticed this trend with some of the films that I really liked. The amount of time that you spend with the characters, it was like an inverse relationship between the amount of time that the film takes place over and how close I felt with the characters. You know, like if I watch a film where it takes place over like 20 years, you know, you see this character go through 20 years, but I don't feel necessarily as close to him or her as I do in films that take place maybe over a few hours. You know, so some of the films that I thought about, you know, when making this film, because I wanted to bring audiences like in a close proximity with Oscar. I wanted to feel like they're hanging out with him every day, and you think about like spending time with somebody from sun up to sundown. That's a very intimate thing to do. I can only count on one hand the amount of people I've ever done that with. So I thought about, you know, films like it's a French film called La Haine that I really like. I thought about a Romanian film called 4 Months, 3 Weeks, 2 Days. There's another film by Gus Van Sant called Elephant that deals with a similar situation. 1993 by Paul Greengrass. These are all films that kind of like you sit in a day with a group of characters.
They also basically take place in real time. I mean, Elephant does take place in the course of the 80 minutes in which this thing happens.
Yes, absolutely. And I wanted audiences to feel like we were just sitting and hanging out with these characters. I didn't want to you know, drive their attention too far with certain cuts. You know, and that's how the long takes kind of came into effect. You know, especially in some of the domestic scenes. You know, if you're hanging out with somebody, you're not really jumping in and jumping out on them. You know what I mean? Oftentimes, you just kind of sitting back and letting the moment play out.
There are certain cliches that we expect with movies with African American protagonists, and one is music. And the way music is used in this movie, there was obviously a deliberate choice, besides budget, but choices about the way you use music and sound in the movie. Talk about that a little bit.
I mean, we had a really talented, amazingly talented composer named Ludwig Göransson. He's actually based here in LA, but he's from Sweden.
He does a lot of TV.
He does tons of TV. Anybody ever seen like The New Girl or Community, Happy Endings? He does music for all of those shows. And he's done all of my films since I've been in film school. Whenever I'm in LA, I sleep on his couch. So like the budget thing isn't a big deal. He would do stuff for me for free, you know.
Well, it's nice to know people, but you know what I'm saying. There's not a whole lot of like hip hop in this movie, the kind of thing that basically
Right.
communicates in cliche form what the
Right.
movie's about.
And on the soundtrack, like Oscar, we wanted for the music that Oscar would be listening to and that his friends would be listening to be true, to the Bay Area music that they would be listening to. But in terms of the sound design for the film, in terms of when we want to score, we really wanted it to be sparse. We really wanted to come out of the environment, to like really try to sneak it in, so that it's not noticed that we started to score here. The score is coming out there. And I was really interested in having a high dynamic range with the sound, design overall. Like really letting the quiet moments be quiet.
There's a lot of, we talked about this before, there's a lot of quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of situations in the movie, like, just from experience, like I've been unfortunate. I've had the unfortunate experience of sitting in the hospital, waiting to hear if somebody I care about is gonna live or die. You know what I mean? And that's one of the quietest places that you can imagine, one of the quietest moments that you can imagine. I had the unfortunate experience of being around gun violence, and it's often gets really quiet after a gun goes off, especially unexpectedly. And it happened actually. One of the things I noticed about my blood run cold from watching the tape over and over again. Like during that time when they were filming and shouting out the police because of the violence that they had seen previously. Everybody was very loud on that train. The police officers were loud, Oscar's friends were loud. It was a very loud thing. When that gun goes off, for about half a second to a second, it's dead silence. Because people are in shock, people are confused at what happened. So I wanted to try to capture, the reality of those moments, and also the reality of the intimate moments. When you hanging at home late at night having a conversation. Like capturing what that feels like in the Bay Area.
I can ask you something too that you must have talked about with you and Michael. You're close to the same age. It's also he got to have this experience that he hasn't really had to have a lot, maybe the exception of Wider, being in a group making a film, being surrounded by the African Americans, which really has to affect the way you perform too. You feel more like yourself, and so that way that with you not with the people who are like you feel different. That must have meant a lot to you.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of fun with that. I mean, but to be honest, we had really diverse. Our crew was like crazy diverse. We had a female cinematographer. We had people.
I never heard of that before.
Rachel, Rachel Morrison was phenomenally talented. Just to give you an idea of our age range, we had one of our producers, Selma Henny. I think Sel was like maybe 23 or 24 while we were filming, and our costume designer Aggie Rogers was in her 70s. So we had a huge range of ages. We had a huge range of sexual orientation. You know what I mean? And we had representation from everybody. So I think that it was really moving to be on a crew that looked like that, and everybody was kind of at home with that and comfortable with that and free to be themselves. And I think that Mike being able to act around young people, especially when he was around the crew, around the cast of other Bay Area natives that played his friends, and it was definitely that comfortability there. They had a lot of fun in between takes. Oftentimes I had to go find them. You know what I mean? I remember one day we were shooting actually a scene where Oscar and his friends were trying to use the restroom, and we got there and it was a nightclub right next to the liquor store, and it was just going. You know what I mean? Like you hear the music through the walls and everything. And while we were setting up, we were just setting up the lights and we couldn't find anybody but Mike. Mike was there. He was ready to work, but everybody else was in the club. We had to go in there and pull them out.
What did you say to these guys? Come on, y'all. Hey, what did you say?
One of them was my baby brother. I just went in there and grabbed him.
The rest weren't your brother.
Nah.
How'd you get them out?
It's time to work.
What was the one thing that Forrest Whitaker said to you as you were shooting that really stuck with you, if there was something?
Forrest says Forrest is one of those people who he doesn't talk a whole lot. Everything he says is really important and really moving. I think that the number one thing he told me was to always make the best decisions that you can make in the moment. And that's all you can ever do. and I think he was referring to you know, the pressures that surround like making a film based on a true story, making a film that's set in an area where it's taking place, making a film where you don't have a lot of resources, you know, making a film on a short schedule. He just told me, you know, make the best decision that you can that's facing you, and then move on, you know. And he's such an honest and calm and strong person, you know. And he's so talented and prolific. He was shooting The Butler, you know, while we were filming this. He said it was one of his most challenging roles he'd ever done, and he would still make himself available, you know, whenever we
And
needed
he was
him.
playing a real life figure in that movie too, so he was able to sort of give you experience. He's done that so many times before, but to be living that while you're making that must have really made you guys connect.
Absolutely, and he was there for our actors as well. You know, our actors were very fond of him, and you know, any questions that they had, you know, I was always getting to, you know, pass them to Forrest, and Forrest was always getting to reach out to him. So he was just an incredible resource.
The thing I find so interesting about the movie is just watching the little girl. I mean, she's really something. Talk about finding her.
Well, Ariana, we actually found through significant. She had worked with Forrest before in a film called The Pocket. She's from Atlanta, and she came in. You know, her family brought her. She has really great parents. And I mean, the coolest thing about Ariana, I've worked with child actors before, and oftentimes when you find child actors that are really talented, they tend to be almost like weird kids, like wise beyond their years. You know what I mean? And it can be unnerving sometimes. You know. You know, anybody who's filmmakers work with child actors, you guys probably know. And what was interesting about Ariana was she was incredibly professional. She really loved to act. You know, she loved to sing as well, but she was still a kid. You know what I mean? Like between takes, she was still very much a kid. You know, very much enjoying herself. And I think having her family there and having really great parents, helped with those things. But it was a moving process working with her. And you know, in that scene with her and Mike, when they're in the bedroom, oftentimes she would hold Mike accountable. You know, like she'd say, "Yo, Mr. Michael, you know, you gotta say it like this." And Michael kind of looked at me like, "Man, I guess you're right."
I'll be producer of the directing debut next year. But I think what's interesting about this too is it's so much about family. I've said this to you before. We talked about this before. That it's a movie about a man who's at that age, especially in Black culture, so much of it is about defining your masculinity, and his masculinity is defined in these really vague ways. He's not making a living. He's dealing with his mother who's telling him what to do, his wife who's telling him what to do. It's, in a weird way, it's such an archetypal African-American story, but it played so specifically here. I mean, was that one of the things that attracted to you too, that it was, as much as it's about this intimate story you're talking about, it's about issues that are affecting so many young men in this country?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was about issues that I'm fairly familiar with. I mean, it's funny that you're a brilliant critic, man. It's funny that you talk about some of the things that we thought about going into it. And I think with masculinity, and what that is. You know, oftentimes in urban culture, you know, we live in a hyper masculine culture. You know, a culture where you know, you want to be protective of the women in your life. You know what I mean? You want to be the breadwinner. You want to be the provider. You know, you got to be tough. And so often manhood is judged by those things. And it's interesting because for Oscar, you know, he's this man that's surrounded by women. You know, the people that define him in his life are the women in his life. And every mistake that he makes personally, it hurts them the most. You know, they live in constant fear of him going back to jail. You know, so that's why they always nagging on him like that. And you talk about like economic ability in terms of being masculine. You know, it was interesting to me that all these women in his life, from his mom to his girl, you know, to his sister, they're all working on his day when he's talking to them. You know what I mean? His mom's calling him. He's calling his mom. She's at work. He's dropping his girl off at work. His sister's at work. You know, and all this while he's struggling with that aspect of his life. You know what I mean? For himself. And you know I've been there. You know, being young African American in this culture, and I had to drop somebody I'm romantically involved with off at a blue collar job. You know what I mean? Wishing that wasn't the case. You know, so it was interesting to me to be able to make a film that dealt with some of those things. You know, underneath the surface. And I think that's things that everybody can relate to though as well.
So I mean, I just wondered that was one of the things, because it gives you a chance to make a movie that's big and intimate at the same time. Right? As a first-time filmmaker, you took on a real mouthful with this, and just trying to balance these things where, and as you were talking about, we talked about this before, the movies that influenced you. There's this very subtle thing that you don't realize that you've seen the movie, that the kind of the specter of death is always there. In the movies you've named, even, and The Elephant and United 93. These are all movies that thing is kind of, if you don't know the story going in, you have to basically plant that seed in very subtle ways. Was that something that attracted you to this?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we deal with every day. Just being young and male in an urban environment. I just recently found out the statistic that the most likely cause of death for black males from the teenage years to 40 is homicide. And that's something that doesn't just come from the police. More often than not, it comes from people that look just like us. I'm talking about black crime, and that's something that you live with. When that's your reality, you live with that. And it influences how you act. So often, we tell each other that we talk to somebody that we care about. We tell them I love them every time we get off the phone with them. Give them a big hug every time we see them every day, just because we know we live with that. With that fatal possibility in the air in our lives at all times. So I think that I definitely am attracted to films that deal with those issues. I think that kind of was a necessary thing in our film, just because of what the characters are going through.
It's like that story gave you the incentive to basically pack a lifetime into a single day. That's kind of what you do with the movie, really, Ronnie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was funny because researching his day was kind of a microcosm for his whole life, packed into a day. And it was really ironic that he died on a holiday that everybody looks at as being really, really optimistic. A day where you kind of look, everybody on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, you make resolutions. We kind of looking inward to see what's wrong with ourselves and how can we fix that for next year. For some people, it might be I eat too much. Some people might be I'm gonna stop partying so much and work harder. I'm gonna stop drinking. For him, he had a lot of things to think about, and he spent his day around the people that meant the most to him in his life. So it was a very domestic day with his mom, his girl, and his daughter. A little bit of time with his friends, but I think that it was one of those days where his whole life kind of was represented there.
But also the thing too is, especially in urban areas, New Year's Eve is a time where sometimes you might be afraid to go out into the street because there's a lot of gunfire. And so all that optimism, there's also that kind of thing of you got to be extra careful if you're a person of color. That becomes part of it too.
Absolutely, a lot of police checkpoints. In the Bay Area, everybody takes New Year's Eve as a day to go test their guns, shoot them outside. So you don't know whether you're hearing gunshots or fireworks. The whole night. So it is. Absolutely. It's an optimistic time. It's a fun time, but that other element is definitely, it's definitely there.
Let me ask you this: what was it like? As the last question, because I can see the hook over there on the side. Showing the movie in Cannes, the first showing. What did it feel like going in, and then your experience afterwards?
Going in, I was, it was overwhelming. To think about.
You've been there on the low before, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, I went out there with the short film that played in a sidebar 4 years ago, and while I was there, some of my favorite films I'd ever seen played, and a lot of my favorite films, man, growing up that I love watching play premiere at Cannes. So it's something I try not to think about too much, but I was incredibly nervous, and it was all for Octavia, for Mike, for Melanie. It was their first time ever being in Cannes, so they were. No, none of them had ever been. Yeah, I know Riley either. None of them had ever been. So I was hoping that the audience would like the performances, and embrace the actors and embrace the film. But you had no idea, and that's so many thousand miles away from the Bay Area. When it played and when people responded positively. I actually remember it was raining real hard, and people really attached themselves to Mike's performance, a lot. and said really nice things to him, you know, after the film was over. But it was raining like crazy afterwards when we went outside and got into the cars. And in the car that Mike was in, people were still in the street standing in the rain clapping, and they started to beat on his car. so that was pretty moving moment.
Wow, well, it's an incredible movie. Thank you all for being. Let's thank Ryan Coogler for this.
Thanks,